recording this meeting so that we can put this up on our YouTube channels for the leaders that haven't been able to make it. We are going to have some Q&A. We've got our IFF General Counsel, Megan Michek, on with us today. She's going to kind of walk us through this, but there is a definite trend where we can kind of see with the Delta variant surging, where employers are forcing their members to be vaccinated. Having said that, I'm going ahead and turn it over to our General Counsel, Megan Michek, so she can get started.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for your time so that we can try and address this very important issue. Before we get started, the first thing that I want to do is something that if you've ever sat through a presentation by an IFF lawyer, you are familiar with. I am not providing you with any legal advice here today. I am simply providing you with some information, talking through some of my experiences representing IFF affiliates and others, and the research that we have done. So nothing that we say is intended or should be intended as legal advice. This is just generalized information to assist you guys. So thank you so much, DVP Gilman, for this invitation. As DVP Gilman mentioned, the trend is that it looks like we're going to have to go back into some restrictions, or now that there's a vaccine available, some employers may be taking actions that they had previously not intended to take with respect to vaccinations. And so I think what DVP Gilman wanted to do was to give you all an opportunity to ask questions about that, gather information for your members.
So let's go.
About what's going on and report back. So what I can report to you is the EEOC recently, back in May, issued a guidance that an employer, private sector or public sector, can mandate an employee to be vaccinated against COVID-19 in order to enter the employer's premises. So this was a question that was sort of up in the air up until that point. But now the EEOC has issued their formal opinion or informal, but it's on their website, that the federal equal employment opportunity laws do not prevent an employer from requiring employees physically enter vaccinated against COVID-19, so long as they are subject to reasonable accommodation provisions, Title VII and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so that would mean that individuals who have a religious objection to being vaccinated, or who are unable to be vaccinated for a disability-based reason, are offered reasonable accommodations that would allow them to do their job. So that's the, the short version of things. DVP Gilman, I can sort of go into all the legal boringness, but it may make more sense to allow folks to ask questions. I see I'm not the only attorney on the line, so if other attorneys want to chime in, you're more than welcome to. But hopefully we can help answer some of these questions, and I think that might be an easier way to go through it. But again, I'm happy to keep talking if you all want to hear my voice.
Perfect. Megan, real quick, one question that I've had addressed to me numerous times, and for those of you guys that have other questions, please raise your hand and I'll try to get to them. We've got 122 and counting. Sorry for those that weren't able to get on earlier. We expanded the room size. But the first question, Megan, is from a legal standpoint, have we had any exceptions for those people that have been deemed COVID positive already, have the antibodies? Can they still be mandated to required to take a vaccine?
So the short answer to that is probably. There may be an exception for the period. My understanding is that there is, for medical reasons, a period after an employee or an individual has tested positive for COVID when doctors recommend that they not get vaccinated. So during that window, yes, if there's a mandatory vaccination requirement in place, you may be able to have an exemption. But there is no exemption out there for those who have antibodies if what is being required is a vaccination. So one of the things that your members need to look at is what is actually being required. Is it a vaccination? Is it proof that they are immune to COVID? Is it, certain levels of antibodies in their blood or a vaccination? So again, it's really going to be dependent on what the specific order that's being implemented is.
Perfect. Thank you. And again, everybody, for those of you guys that are just joining, getting into the room late, please make sure you're muting your mics. We got a lot of background noise and we want to make sure everybody's able to hear. We are recording this meeting. We'll try to put it up on our YouTube channel for those of you guys that want to share. So having said that, are there any questions? I don't see any hands raised yet. John, do you have anybody with raised hands?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay.
So let me, while we're waiting for folks that maybe have questions, let me address another issue that's come up, which is state anti-vaccination or state laws that prohibit mandates, state laws that prohibit vaccination passports. That is something that, again, your members should be cognizant of. My understanding is that in the 10th, the only state that's potentially considering something or that has something along those lines right now is going to be Arizona, where the state has enacted a law that requires employers to provide reasonable accommodation for employees with sincerely held religious beliefs, practices, or observances that prevent them from getting the COVID-19 vaccine. There are exceptions for hardships. The bill would also prohibits vaccination passports. So again, this is something that your you should be cognizant of, your members should be cognizant of, is it may be that an employer can mandate that employees get vaccinated, but they can't ask the employees whether they've been vaccinated or not. It has to be sort of an honor system. So for those of you that are in Arizona, there is a state law that you should be, sort of aware of that may impact what the EEOC has said, because the EEOC is only addressing federal laws. So some states are out there enacting their own laws to address these issues.
Perfect.
EVP Gilman, you have a question from Jeremy Crawford at Local 522.
All right, go ahead, Jeremy.
Megan, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
You started to touch on it. Question, we've seen one of the caveats for this being religious beliefs. What legality or burden of proof is there for members to opt in for that caveat, so to speak?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on his typically, and this is going to be maybe dependent upon a specific state law, but for example, in Arizona, it's a sincerely held religious belief, practice, or observance, which typically means that an employer can inquire and confirm that this is not something that, an individual may have happened upon in the hours after they learned that they would have to be vaccinated. It's, the employer, again, can traditionally inquire about whether the employee actually sincerely holds these religious beliefs. This has come up in the past in the context of mandatory flu vaccinations. And even though the medical condition is not the same, the disease is not the same, the EEO is, looking at that because many employers do mandate flu vaccinations. And when it comes to flu vaccinations, the EEO has allowed the employers to inquire and to confirm that the religious belief is sincerely held by requesting something under oath that the religious belief is sincerely held, or statements from a pastor or other religious leader. So it's going to depend on your state law, how you would prove that.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. Anybody else yet, John?
No, sir. No hands up at the moment.
Hey guys, this is your opportunity to try to ask some questions if you have any. Daisy from Hawaii, I know you were waiting to maybe talk to some of the people, some of the leaders that might be on shift. Do you have anything that you're curious about?
Sure. Actually, Jeremy Irvine has a question and it's already in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
What are reasonable accommodations? Okay, I think Megan just covered that.
Well, and so what accommodation is reasonable is going to be dependent upon a specific situation. So typically those employers who are already mandating vaccinations and are giving accommodations for those who can't be vaccinated are requiring a combination of mask wearing in the workplace, physical distancing where possible, as well as regular testing. I've not heard of testing every shift. I've heard of testing, once a week, but some combination thereof that the employer has concluded gives them comfort that employees are not bringing this condition into the workplace is what's going to be the reasonable accommodation there.
Awesome. Megan, looks like we have another question as well from Scott. His question is, how can it be mandated prior to FDA approval?
So there is a fairly complicated legal opinion out there relating to the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act and the exceptions and language in that act. And essentially, what the Department of Justice has concluded is that the provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that deal with emergency use authorizations simply don't apply here to prohibit employees getting this vaccination, even while it's under an emergency use authorization. I will note the EEOC has not opined on this. However, the courts that have looked at this have also concluded that an employer, the EUA, the emergency use authorization, is not relevant to the question of whether an employer can mandate the vaccination. But so I know that that's not a real clear answer, but the DOJ opinion is available on the website, or is available on the web. I can send the link to DVP. It's very complicated and nuanced, and it would probably take me the rest of our time to explain it, but you can certainly read it for yourself. It goes into quite a bit of detail about why the FDCA does not prohibit mandatory vaccinations under an EUA.
Perfect. We've got another question, Megan, from Dan Freiberg, local 4005, United Goodyear Firefighters. Can an employer cover members that are vaccinated that get COVID with industrial leave and make unvaccinated members use sick leave? Basically, can they treat employees differently for being vaccinated versus unvaccinated?
I think that's going to be a question of state law. Is the vaccine mandated in your state? Is the vaccine prohibited in your state? What's going on in the state? But the reality is it's a question that comes down to, and what the presumptions are under the workers' comp law. What it's going to come down to is a state question of, is this a condition that the employee got at work? And it may be a little bit easier for an employee who's vaccinated to prove that they got it at work than for an employee who is unvaccinated. So not so much are you vaccinated or not, but whether did you get it at work or not, and what does being vaccinated do to the burden of proof?
Awesome. So basically, in summary, it's going to be a state-by-state cases.
Yeah.
DVP Gilman, we have a few questions. We have a hand raised, Josh, and then followed by Adam Walker.
Well, perfect. Go ahead, Josh Campbell.
There we go. You guys hear me okay?
We got you.
All right, but Steve, this is probably more a question for just for the state of Arizona, since the governor has recently passed a legislation that we're not going to mandate vaccines. I'm of the understanding that that's not going to take place until September 24th. What we're seeing in Tucson specifically is our management and mayor and council trying to fast track this so that it's done prior to the 24th. Is there anything, do you know that we're doing anything with this, or as far as anything in the meantime, or how do we handle that?
From an IFF level, again, we're not supporting mandated vaccines. This might be something, Josh, that we run up with Brian Jeffries and the Professional Firefighters of Arizona. Again, it's a very specific state issue, trying to fast track something before that legislation takes place with the governor. I think maybe the best track or the best answer for this question is going to be found with the Professional Firefighters of Arizona, and that we use them as a resource in this particular instance. Maybe with a little bit of pressure and assistance, the PFFA can get it fast tracked a little bit more, or maybe put a moratorium on that vaccine. If that answers your question. All right, Adam Walker, and then we've got a couple of questions in the queue on the chat function. Adam Walker, Local 112, go ahead, brother.
Steve, thank you and John for setting this up. And I'm sorry if this was covered at the beginning. I was having some technical difficulties, but my understanding from legal is that each state can and has the authority to mandate the vaccination because of a precedent from an old court case or something like that. I mean, where does it imply that they can do this?
So there's a case from actually 1905. It's called Jacobson's v. Massachusetts. It's a Supreme Court case. For those of you that are interested in reading Supreme Court cases, the citation is 197 U.S. 11. Again, it's from 1905. And in that case, the Supreme Court found that a state may mandate require all members of the public to be vaccinated against smallpox. And so that case has been used and has, in fact, in this COVID pandemic been used to conclude that an employer or another public entity can require employees or other individuals to get vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. There is a case out of the 7th Circuit involving Indiana University that actually came out on, what's today, Wednesday, on Monday, in which the court concluded, based on Jacobson, this 1905 case, that an employer could, or the Indiana University could mandate its students, staff, and faculty to be vaccinated against COVID-19 unless they are entitled to an accommodation in order to be in person on campus. So the long version is the case is Jacobson v. Massachusetts. I'd also urge you to take a look at Clausen v. the Trustees of Indiana University.
And Megan, just so you guys know, everybody on this Zoom, I uploaded before we started the Zoom, there is an actual link to that court case at the top of the chat functions. Additionally, in California, PERB came down with the decision that mandatory vaccinations are not negotiable. So for the state of California, PERB's already ruled on it. We're not saying that's going to be the end all be all, but there is definitely some precedence, and you can kind of see this heading down a certain direction, which is why we wanted to have this meeting to try to get ahead of some of these questions. I know we've got some hand up, Devin and Robert Sanchez, New Mexico president, but we got some on the chat function first that we're going to address. First, we got Sean Wooten, 4317. Megan, he's wondering, do employers have to pay for quarantine on days that weren't scheduled days? So basically, they're going to force somebody to go home and quarantine, and now they're not allowed to leave their home. Are they going to be required to pay? Eric, mute your, thank you. Go ahead.
No, the employer is going to have to either pay the employee or require the employee to use sick leave if they're quarantining, depending on what their policy is. But just like if you were sick while you were off duty, you wouldn't be getting paid for that. Okay, perfect. So again, case by case basis, which seems to be a ongoing trend, right? State policy and what's mandated in your MOU or collective bargaining agreement. There's a question from Chris from I-60. He's asking about people that have had reactions from a COVID vaccine. I'm assuming the question is if they're forced to, they're being mandated to vaccinate and they have an adverse reaction, will it be covered? You know, again, this is going to be a state-by-state question, but typically, yes. If your employer requires you to get vaccinated, the employer has to deal with the consequences of that.
Okay.
Can I clarify my question?
Sure. Go ahead, Chris.
So basically what happened is I end up with Graves' disease after getting COVID, no family history. Apparently it can be triggered by viral infection. Had the symptoms since then, so I haven't gotten the vaccine. So is there a cutout for people that, you know, can they get a doctor's note or something saying they can't get the vaccine?
Most of the states that are, most of the employers, all of the employers that are mandating vaccines are giving individuals, are making exceptions for individuals who either have a disability that prevents them from getting the vaccine, or who have a sincerely held religious belief that would prevent them from getting the vaccine, as long as there is a reasonable accommodation available that would allow them to do their job safely and efficient, or to do their job safely.
Awesome. Thanks. We're going to go one more through the chat function before we get to Devin and Robert. Alex Pop from Encinitas. Once the FDA approves the vaccine and makes it a condition of employment, is there a workaround we can push? And I think it's going to probably default, like you said before, religious exemption or some sort of bargaining if it's already in place, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Alex, hopefully that answers your question. If not, we can come back to it if you want to chime in. Let's go ahead and, John, let's go ahead and click on Devin.
You got it.
Devin, go ahead and tell us where you're from and what your question is, brother.
Hi, how's it going? Devin from Arcadia Firefighters Local 3440. Had a question from one of our members here. Is it legal for citizens to request vaccinated first responders only to enter and provide 911 services on medical calls?
I don't know that most jurisdictions allow citizens to make specific requests of their first responders. So for example, I'm not sure that a jurisdiction would honor such a request. So I'm not sure, again, that there's any law on it.
Awesome. We've got, hopefully, Devin, that answers your question. President Robert Sanchez out of New Mexico.
Yes, ma'am. Megan, I have a question. I have some federal firefighters here in White Sands and Los Alamos National Labs. So when Governor Biden does a mandate for vaccinations for government employees, does that include firefighters as well?
I believe it does include firefighters. Yes, I would encourage your members to reach out to DVP Johnson on that. But my understanding from my interactions on this and the research that we've done is that it would include the federal firefighters.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Robert. Mark from, we kind of already answered this one about FDA approval. You're still held accountable if your employer forces you to vaccinate, whether or not it's going to be FDA approval. Just so you guys know, an article that I was reading today, there's thinking that Pfizer can be approved up as early as September.
Right.
Adverse reactions we covered. Let's go ahead and Nathan Norris. If an employee is unvaccinated and they allow testing in lieu of vaccination, who is required to pay for the testing?
Right now, I believe testing is being paid for by the government. But once that ends, many employers are provided the testing, but I believe it would be in the employee's insurance because the employer is not requiring the testing. The employer is giving the employee an option. But my instinct is that many employers who are requiring testing as part of a accommodation for those who are not getting vaccinated are going to have some specific requirements for that testing and maybe offering it themselves just to ensure that it's being done how they want it done.
All right. Kind of looking through some of these. John, let's go ahead and let Pete go ahead and tell us where you're from and what your question is, brother.
Corona Firefighters, Local 3757. My question is regarding reasonable accommodations actually in the firehouse. And if IFF has any comments on that or is looking into that to assist us so that if our agency is looking at that, we can help them make the best decisions possible to make accommodations for our members that cannot get the vaccine.
So I don't know that the IFF is coming up with a list of recommended accommodations because it is going to be beyond masking. How each fire station addresses the physical distancing or whatever accommodations the employer believes are appropriate, and the employer and the employee work together to conclude are appropriate, is going to really be a case-by-case basis, and is really also going to depend on what's an undue burden for the employer. So, for example, in a larger fire station, they may be able to set up separated areas where employees who are not vaccinated, who have to wear masks as part of the accommodation, are able to go and unmask. A smaller fire station may not be able to do that without an undue hardship. So I don't know if the IFF is going to be making any recommendations, simply because it's a very, what's a reasonable accommodation is a very fact specific question.
All right. Perfect, Megan. Thank you. We've got a question here as far as an employee claiming their personal health information is private. Do they have to acknowledge whether or not they've been vaccinated?
So under the federal employment laws, under certain circumstances, your employer can ask you for medical information. And so there may be some exceptions, again, under state law for that. But yes, traditionally, the employer can require employees be vaccinated and, if necessary, provide some proof of that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Gentlemen, it looks like Adam Walker put his hand up a second time. So
all right, go ahead, Adam.
Yep, if I didn't put my hand down yet, then I apologize. I'll put it back down now, but I did have a second part to the question since I'm on. And what that is that case that is mentioned, is there any burden on the authority to prove how the vaccine will protect public health, public safety, and the common good, which is basically what they leaned on, where they're looking at a vaccine that has scientific data to actually do that, where there may be some scientific data on this vaccine, and each department may have some data within how they've been after vaccinating some members, and some members having just normal antibodies. But do they have to prove that anyway, or will that just not happen until this case, if it does go that way, is challenged?
So the courts that have looked at this issue have concluded that there is adequate evidence that the vaccine works to meet the Jacobson standard. I would imagine that the Seventh Circuit decision, which is the first appellate court decision that has come out on this issue, is probably not going to be the last. There is a case in the Fifth Circuit that's now making its way up through the process. There's a case in New Mexico, all of which are based on this same argument that an employer can't mandate employees to get a vaccine under an emergency use authorization, or that there's some 14th Amendment prohibition against mandating vaccinations, all of which have been consistently rejected. So I anticipate that there will be additional challenges, but the courts thus far have found that to the extent there's a standard that has to be met, it's been met here.
Were all these cases rejected, or was there a finding? And some of the ones that I've seen that were rejected, they were only rejected because the authority didn't impose any consequences. In other words, there's not really a decision. It's just that it was the judge ruled that, or he or she threw the case out because there was nothing done. It was just words saying we're going to mandate it. Then it's challenged, goes to a judge, and that gets thrown out because there was no consequence to challenge. So is that what you're referring to?
So there are some cases that have been thrown out on that basis. The Seventh Circuit case that I was mentioning was up on because the plaintiffs were seeking an injunction to stop the employer or to stop Indiana University from requiring them to get vaccinated in order to come to campus. And the court rejected that, not because they hadn't returned to campus, but because they found that a mandatory vaccination was a reasonable demand to return to the work site to the school site. The same thing is true, I believe, in the Houston case out of that's currently before the Fifth Circuit.
But there's no end. It hasn't been ruled on yet.
I think it's going to depend on what you mean by has been ruled on. I think that the district court's ruled on it. At least one appellate court has ruled on it. No, the Supreme Court has not ruled on it.
All right, thanks, Megan. Jimmy Smith, DFSR Smith, is your question? If you go ahead and shoot your question. Yeah, I know you typed one in. I just want to make sure it's the same.
It is the same question. Thank you, DVP Gilman. My question is, if the employer is requiring either a mask mandate, a vaccine, and or testing, is it going to be on a state by state, or should I say city by city basis, on whether or not the employer is required to financially compensate a member for getting the test and or allowing time for the employee to get the test?
Yeah, that's going to be dependent on the contours of the specific requirement, how it's laid out, and things of that nature.
So specific to a state and or a bargaining unit.
Exactly. And that would be, historically, again, that's going to be the type of thing that even if, as DVP Gilman noted earlier, you can't negotiate over a vaccine mandate. It would be a appropriate subject of collective bargaining in most jurisdictions that have collective bargaining to address those issues.
And again, just from a standpoint of California, not the rest of the district, mind you, there was a decision this week that was shared with me about the PERB ruling, and PERB said that it is not an item for negotiation. So it's a little bit all over the place. We've got B. Wilkie, and then we got Brother Buford out of San Francisco. So let's go ahead and start with Brother Wilkie. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Brian Wilkie, Local 3604. My question has kind of been touched on a little bit here and there. I'm just looking for a little bit further clarification. So when these vaccines first came on the scene, we were advised by the CDC, by the powers that be, if you will, that certain groups were recommended to not take the vaccine. From what I can tell, the vaccines haven't changed at all, and that same group of people is still represented within the union. I have read over some of the cases regarding, a case can be made by an employee whether or not the reaction that an employee has had to past vaccinations is severe enough for them to be able to refuse this vaccine. My question is, a lot of my members are afraid of taking the vaccine because of the side effects and caused by the vaccine, but they haven't had adverse reactions from vaccines specifically. So my question is what can I do logistically to, or what literature is out there that speaks specifically to this, and what kind of burden of proof are my members going to be held for to prove that they would have some type of a sensitivity, even though they've never had a sensitivity to vaccinations?
So again, in the case that an employer has mandated a vaccine, the exceptions are going to be a Title VII exception, which is historically a religious accommodation, or an Americans with Disabilities exception, which is what you said. I anticipate that I would have a negative reaction to this. I would like to have a reasonable accommodation to not have to get this vaccination and still be able to come into the workplace. And so what the employee would have to provide is going to be similar to any other reasonable accommodation, which is some proof that they are disabled, which means in this particular, the instance you've described, likely to have an adverse reaction to a vaccine. It seems to me that under that circumstance, they're going to have to involve their doctor, who would know their medical history and be able to provide some information that they might be more sensitive than members of the public to a vaccination, and thus for them, it would be contraindicated.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. All right, guys, real quick, we're gonna have a couple more questions answered, but then we have to be very cognizant of the general counsel's time. She's very busy, so I'm not going to keep her on this Zoom all day. It seems like a lot of these questions are very similar, and we'll do a quick recap at the end. But the last 4 questions are going to be Brother Buford, John Gray, David Rodriguez out of Sedona, and Vince Wells. And then we're going to get the general counsel on her way. We'll again do a quick summary of some of the things we've discussed, but also please know that California Professional Firefighters President Brian Rice is also in the process of setting up a town hall. I'll be helping him moderate that, and we're going to have more of these because we know that this is an incredibly important topic for you guys. But having said that, President Buford, 798, go ahead, brother.
Thank you very much. Sean Buford, Local 798. It's sort of a 2-part question. I know under the emergency declaration, thank you, IFF, for helping getting the Ryan Right changed so they can let us know someone's COVID status for our protection. And also, it's been, at least in California, San Francisco, presumptive if you got COVID. Do we see after the emergency declaration that they will remain to notify people of people's COVID status, and will it remain presumptive after the emergency declaration? What do you guys think?
I'm going to defer on that because that's really more of a political question than a legal one, candidly. I anticipate just, in many states, the presumption for COVID-19 does have a sunset. For example, I think in the feds, it's 2013. Many of the states that enacted presumptions early on in the pandemic did give it a sunset. I'm not, again, since I'm not giving legal advice, I'm not familiar with whether California has one that would sunset. So I think that's more of a political question than a legal one.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Sean, we'll try to get that answered with President Rice and the CPF team. Attorney John Gray, go ahead, brother.
Thank you. I was reviewing the PERB decision, and I believe the decision you're referring to is the University of California Regents decision on influenza that they thought might be applicable to COVID-19. Right. Now, what that did say, it said the decision to make the decision to mandate was not meet and conferable. However, the effects of it was meet and conferable, which we've always referred to as impact bargaining. Perfect. And I believe if we look at that decision carefully, it does raise the issue of impact on there. And now, while it didn't specifically apply to COVID, it applied to influenza, because when it finally got to PERB, it was a 2020 decision. Right. You might want to take a look at that. Megan might want to take a look at that decision from PERB. You can get it pretty easily. It did say the effects were meet and conferable.
Okay, that's good to know. I appreciate it. Thank you, John. David Rodriguez, Sedona, 3690.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks, Steve and Megan, for your time. Quick questions. It's a 2-part question. Number 1, we have a mask mandate policy for Sedona Fire District, and members who are vaccinated do not have to wear a mask. Those who aren't have to wear a mask. We had a member come into work who later tested positive, and those that were following policy were all still sent home. Is there anything that we can look at that would help our members be compensated and not being forced to use their personal time for being sent home while following a policy?
No, again, that's going to be a state law question, but there's nothing in the federal sector that I'm aware of. The feds had a sick leave that probably was not applicable to your members, but that would have allowed for the employers to get some tax credits for giving sick leave rather than making employees sort of burn through their own. That's over now. So no, as far as I'm aware, on the federal level, there's nothing that would be sort of applicable to the employer paying for that leave versus the employees having to use their own sick leave.
All right, thank you, Megan. Steve, the second part to that, is there any more programs that were offered like in 2020 for fire departments, fire districts to be reimbursed for paying for sick leave for the members? That emergency I'll have to look up the name, but you know what I'm talking about?
I do. As far as I know, no new legislation has been passed regarding COVID-19. So not sure if that's going to be something that's going to be included from a legislative standpoint with the recent spike and the potential of a huge uptick for our members. So that's definitely something I can ask David and follow up with our legislative team. Megan, I'm going to go ahead. I know we got a couple more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and get you out of here.
Okay.
Really quick, if you don't mind staying on for a quick summary. Again, guys, everybody here needs to know the position that the IFF believes that all of our members should be vaccinated, but those members should not be forced to be vaccinated. All right, that is the IFF's official stance. Having said that, that's not up for discussion. There is current case law that says your employer can force you to vaccinate. The recent 7th court decision, the appeals court in Indiana University, I believe, is the one that Megan mentioned. It's applicable by each state and jurisdiction on whether or not you're covered when you get sent home. Reasonable accommodations is a little bit all over the board. So go ahead and mute that. Who's that? Not sure who's talking.
It's like it's Eric.
Hey, O'Hara, mute your button next time. All right, so let's go ahead and so continue to recap that the compensation being sent home is a little bit all over the board based on local policy, local jurisdiction, whether or not you're covered for presumption is a state matter. And am I missing anything else that seemed to be coming up quite frequently?
No, I mean, I think you've hit, sort of on the major questions or the major issues. Again, these are really complicated, especially if you have members who are do have a disability and for that reason cannot be vaccinated. These are really complicated issues. And so as an attorney, my recommendation would be that with these questions, you're not able to, work through them with your employer, that you get legal advice in the state where you're located, get legal advice about what your rights are under the specific circumstances. The mandates, to the extent employers are mandating vaccinations, it looks a little different everywhere. And so again, we're not offering legal advice here, but it's important to understand what the contours of the mandate are in the specific jurisdiction, if there is one, where you are, to make sure that your members understand what their rights are and what the consequences of the failure to follow through if there is a mandate and on that.
We do have one clarifying question from DFSR Justin Cheney real quick. Sorry, Megan.
Thank you, DVP.
Yes.
Megan, just the real quick question, and DVP Gilman just spoke real briefly about it, the ADA reasonable accommodations. What does that look like? I know here in Albuquerque, reasonable accommodations for a municipality is that they can move you within anywhere in the city. So some of our members that might not be able to get the vaccine think in reasonable accommodation would mean somewhere else in the fire department. But here in Albuquerque, that could mean you're going to go work for the dog pound, with your regular rate.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a reasonable accommodation is going to be different depending on the jurisdiction. What's reasonable in one place may cause an undue hardship somewhere else based on the size, based on the needs of the department. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of what we're seeing is the accommodation of requiring employees to wear masks, requiring employees to get tested. Under that circumstance, the EEO would probably say that the employer has to pay for that. But it may be different, based on your different jurisdictions. What's going to be reasonable is always a fact-specific inquiry under federal law.
Awesome, Megan. Thanks for taking the time. Again, guys, we'll send this out. We'll send out a link via YouTube. Again, Megan, we'll go ahead and let you leave the room. Again, thank you for taking the time. I know it was a little bit longer than we had anticipated. Rob, I know you have a question. Maybe we can go ahead and hear it. We'll let you and then go from there.
It's illegal, but we got.
So Rob Lester, Anaheim, go ahead, brother.
Good morning. Thank you. Rob Lester, Anaheim Local 2899. I have a California specific question. Hopefully somebody can answer. Is there any talk about extending? Hello?
Brian Rice just jumped on, so we may have some information, so go ahead.
On that
Okay.
note, I'm
Is
going to
there
jump
any-
off, DVP Gilman. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rob.
Is there any discussion due to the new Delta variant and the upswing of COVID cases in California? Is there any discussion of extending SB 95, the supplemental paid sick leave benefit?
President Rice, did you jump on, brother? You're muted, Brian.
And then another Grand Slam with cheese.
Sounds good.
Hey, Brian, if you can hear us, you're muted, brother. All right, Rob, we'll try to get that question answered. I'll talk to President Rice a little bit later. Does anybody else have? Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? I know Brian's got his hand up, but we can't hear him, so I'm not sure if we're having technical difficulties there. If Ferris is on and can help him out.
DVP Gilman, this is John.
Yep, go ahead, John.
I had my hand up. Just an observation. Two things. What I heard from Megan, just to kind of summarize, is that, and I put this in the chat, is that even though our members have HIPAA protections, everybody has that. What I'm hearing, at least, is that a combination of existing laws such as Jacobson, OSHA guidelines, and previous issues that we've had to deal with either at the state or the federal level when it came to flu vaccines, unfortunately, may legally or politically outweigh those HIPAA protections. So it sounds like there's a lot of interest in not having to even answer the question about whether our people are vaccinated. But what I'm pulling away from this is that we can be put at a decision point where we have to answer that. And for me, why that's important is because as labor leaders, that then goes in the next thing, which where everybody on this call is well aware of, we always have the potential for stupid firefighter tricks. It's only a matter of time before we find ourselves with somebody dishonestly answering the question. And we have to be very, very cognizant of taking a bad situation that we're already in and moving it into something that could create a whole nother mess, which is discipline issues. If someone were to forge or lie or somehow be dishonest about their actual vaccine status simply to get out of the conversation. So I just want to put that on everybody's radar. Thanks.
Perfect. Brian Rice, CPF president, just joined us back in. Rob, hopefully he can answer that question. We're having some technical difficulties. President Rice, you there, brother? All right, until he gets set up, let's go ahead and run it over to somebody else just had their hand raised. Oh, they lowered it. Hey, Brian, are you there? All right, does anybody else have any questions? Going once, going twice. All right, hopefully this was informative. Again, I know it's a little bit all over the place, but there is a lot of recent case law, and we wanted to make sure that our leaders had the ability to kind of prepare for this groundswell that seems like it's approaching, where employers are going to be mandating these vaccines, and what, if anything, as a leader, we can do to rectify it. Brian's trying to come back into the room again. Richard, go ahead. You got a question? Richard's iPhone. All right. So again, we'll try to put this up on our YouTube channel, share the link to all of our members. Brian Rice, if you finally got on, you can say something before we get off. So the CPF is going to be putting together a town hall again. They're going to have some doctors present. Hopefully we're going to get some senior IFF staff members on the town hall as well. So there'll be a lot to discuss on that CPF one. So look out for that information soon. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and close down the meeting. Thanks everybody for joining. If you got any questions, contact myself or one of the DFSRs. and we'll get those questions answered to you. It might take a little bit of time. But other than that, thanks everybody for joining.